Interstellar politics operates on a simple principle. Everyone hates everyone else, but everyone needs everyone else's resources. So everyone pretends to get along while quietly plotting everyone else's downfall. It's remarkably similar to a homeowners association meeting, except with more antimatter weapons and, according to YouTube analytics, 98% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. Fewer passive-aggressive notes about lawn maintenance. The collective assembly had been functioning on this delicate balance of mutual contempt for approximately 7,000 standard cycles. 17 species, each convinced of their own superiority, gathered in rotating stations to debate trade routes, territorial disputes, and which species had the most aesthetically pleasing waste disposal systems. Dignity was paramount. Protocol was sacred. Nobody touched anybody else's stuff, and absolutely nobody admitted to having feelings about anything. Then humanity showed up and immediately violated every single unspoken rule by acknowledging that rules existed in the first place. The Vrex were crystalline beings who communicated through light refraction and considered themselves the pinnacle of logical thought. The Kalnari were aquatic philosophers who spent most meetings in specialized tanks, pondering the nature of existence while simultaneously judging everyone else's posture. The Thornback Collective were insectoid warriors who'd built their entire civilization on the concept of personal space, which they defended with serrated limbs and aggressive chittering. Humans were bipedal disaster mammals who'd somehow achieved faster-than-light travel despite spending half their planetary history hitting each other with progressively more sophisticated rocks. Station Kepler-7 floated in neutral space, a magnificent construct of diplomatic architecture designed to make everyone equally uncomfortable. The central chamber featured seating arrangements calculated by a team of xenopsychologists to maximize the distance between natural enemies while preventing anyone from claiming the psychological advantage of elevated positioning. Temperature, gravity, and atmospheric composition shifted in carefully controlled zones. It was, in essence, a miracle of engineering dedicated to organized hostility. Ambassador Trevak of the Vrex delegation stood in his designated zone, his crystalline form catching the filtered starlight and projecting it in patterns that translated roughly to, "I am more important than you, but I acknowledge your inferior existence with appropriate condescension." Across the negotiation space, Commander Jess of the Thornback Collective rattled her carapace plates in a rhythm that meant, "Your importance is noted and will be destroyed at the first opportunity that doesn't violate 16 different treaties." Between them, attempting to explain why humanity deserved a contested mining sector in the outer reaches, stood Ambassador Chen Wei, who was currently experiencing what humans called a very long day, and what the rest of the galaxy called standard diplomatic procedure. The mining rights were established through legitimate salvage protocols, Chen stated, her voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd explained the same thing 47 times. Human vessels reached the derelict station first, following all accepted guidelines for abandoned territory claims. Trevak's light patterns sharpened to cutting angles. The station was not abandoned. It was in a state of strategic non-occupation. "That's literally the definition of abandoned," Chen replied. "Your species has been part of the collective assembly for merely 30 cycles," Jess clicked, her translator converting the sounds into something approximating contempt. "You presume much, claiming territory in regions where established powers have historical precedent. Historical precedent for not using it, apparently." The Kalnari representative, Ambassador Quellen, rippled the water in his containment sphere, a gesture that conveyed deep philosophical disagreement mixed with superior moistness. The human delegation fails to comprehend the sophisticated nuance of interstellar territorial recognition. Occupation is not merely physical presence. It encompasses historical resonance, cultural significance, and the metaphysical weight of collective consciousness. Chen blinked slowly, employing an ancient human technique for maintaining sanity in absurd situations. "So you're saying nobody's using it, but you're all mad that we are?" You reduce complex diplomatic realities to childish oversimplification. Trivak's patterns flashed. I reduce complex diplomatic nonsense to accurate assessment, Chen corrected. The chamber's environmental controls registered a subtle shift in atmospheric pressure. Every species present recognized the biological indicators. Pheromones from the thornbacks suggesting aggression, thermal fluctuations from the vrex indicating heightened processing activity, increased particulate dispersion from Quellen's sphere signaling agitation. Humans called it reading the room. Galactic Protocol called it threat assessment patterns reaching critical diplomatic failure thresholds. Perhaps, Jess began, her serrated forelimbs extending slightly, the human delegation requires demonstration of why established powers maintain territorial claims through centuries of non-occupation. Perhaps, Chen replied, her own body language shifting into something the translator algorithm struggled to categorize, but every predator species in the room instinctively recognized the human delegation is tired of participating in the galaxy's most elaborate game of I'm not touching you. The Vrex ambassador's crystalline structure resonated at a frequency that shattered 3 decorative elements in the neutral zone. The Thornback commander advanced half a step, which, in her species' territorial display protocols, was equivalent to a declaration of imminent violence. Quellen's sphere roiled with chemically enhanced indignation. Chen Wei, descendant of persistence hunters who'd chased prey across continents until said prey died of exhaustion, stood perfectly still with the particular posture humans adopted when they decided consequences were someone else's problem. Station Kepler-7's advanced sensors detected elevated stress hormones, increased muscular tension, and the preliminary stages of what its diplomatic protocol subroutines classified as imminent interspecies incident requiring immediate intervention and approximately 47 forms filed in triplicate. The chamber's central mediator, a holographic projection of neutral authority designed by committee to be maximally inoffensive, activated with a chime that everyone found irritating in equal measure. The assembly recognizes potential escalation. All parties are reminded that physical confrontation violates Protocol 7012, subsection. We are aware of the protocols, Trivak interrupted, his light patterns conveying the crystalline equivalent of eye-rolling. We are also aware that human membership in this assembly has introduced unprecedented violations of established diplomatic decorum. Decorum, Chen repeated, her tone suggesting she'd found a particularly interesting species of amusing nonsense. You mean the decorum where everyone claims territory they don't use, refuses to share resources that benefit everyone, and spends centuries in meetings accomplishing absolutely nothing except feeling superior to each other. That decorum has maintained peace for millennia, Quellen burbled. That decorum has maintained stagnation dressed up as peace, Chen countered. There's a difference between not fighting and actually cooperating. Jess's mandibles clicked in rapid succession, a sound her species produced immediately before combat. You dare lecture established civilizations on cooperation? Your planet spent 10,000 cycles in primitive warfare before achieving basic spaceflight. Exactly, Chen said, and her smile contained the particular edge of someone who just made a point their opponent hadn't anticipated. We fought each other constantly, nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times, and somehow figured out that maybe, possibly, working together produced better results than endless posturing. Novel concept, apparently. The environmental sensors registered critical threshold breaches across multiple species' physiological markers. The holographic mediators cycled through increasingly urgent diplomatic intervention protocols, each designed for specific scenarios that didn't quite match the current situation's unique combination of territorial aggression, cultural contempt, and one human who'd apparently decided that consequences were negotiable. Trivak's crystalline structure began rotating, a display that preceded the Virex method of projecting focused light, capable of inducing temporary blindness in most species. Jess's serrated limbs extended to full combat position, her carapace plates arranging themselves into defensive configuration. Quellen's sphere initiated a chemical release that would make the immediate area psychologically uncomfortable for anyone lacking aquatic adaptations. Chen Wei watched all of this with the expression humans wore when they'd committed to a course of action, and would see it through regardless of reasonable objections like survival instinct or basic self-preservation. The galaxy's most sophisticated diplomatic station, designed specifically to prevent exactly this scenario, registered the equivalent of a mechanical sigh in its processing cores and began preemptively routing emergency medical resources to the central chamber. Somewhere in the human delegation's assigned quarters, a junior attaché noticed the escalating situation on monitoring feeds and made a decision that would fundamentally alter interstellar diplomatic theory for the next 3 centuries. She grabbed a blanket and headed for the chamber at a dead sprint. The junior attaché burst into the central chamber carrying what appeared to be textile-based insanity, and every species present simultaneously experienced the cognitive dissonance of watching someone interrupt a potential interspecies war with what their translation algorithms identified as soft furnishing, purpose, comfort. Her name didn't matter, though her personnel file would later become the most requested document in collective assembly historical archives. What mattered was that she took one look at the standoff, assessed the situation with the particular clarity of someone who hadn't been involved in the previous 4 hours of diplomatic escalation, and decided that protocol was significantly less important than preventing what the humans called a massive clusterfuck. "Everybody sit down right now," she announced, her tone carrying the authority of someone who dealt with worse than alien dignitaries, possibly in the form of retail management or substitute teaching. The holographic mediator flickered in confusion, cycling through diplomatic protocols that had no framework for processing a junior staff member issuing commands to senior ambassadors in the middle of a crisis. It settled on projecting a help icon and hoping someone more qualified would intervene. Trevak's light pattern stuttered mid-aggression display. "You dare interrupt official proceedings with something that will prevent me from filing incident reports until my retirement." "Yes," the attaché interrupted, spreading the blanket across the neutral zone with practiced efficiency. "Ambassador Chen, corner. Commander Jess, opposite corner. Ambassador Trevak, you get the middle since you're emitting radiation anyway. Ambassador Quellen, I'll adjust your sphere positioning in a moment." "This is unprecedented," Quellen burbled, his translator struggling with the combination of indignation and confusion. "Diplomatic protocols established over millennia cannot simply be dismissed by someone who recognizes that you're all about 30 seconds from turning this station into a debris field." The attaché finished positioning the blanket, which was oversized, slightly worn, and emanated the particular thermal signature of something that had been recently used. "Sit down." Jess's mandibles clicked in bewilderment rather than aggression. "You propose that we, representatives of sovereign civilizations, position ourselves on primitive textile as solution to territorial negotiation. I propose that you stop acting like territorial animals and start acting like civilizations. But we're taking baby steps here," the attaché replied. "The blanket is step 1. Chen, displaying the particular wisdom of someone who recognized an exit strategy when one materialized via textile, sat down on the indicated corner. Her movement sent subtle ripples through the blanket's surface, and every non-human representative tracked the motion with the kind of attention usually reserved for potential threats. "Ambassador Chen has succumbed to human peculiarity," Trevak observed, his light patterns conveying clinical analysis mixed with something the translation algorithms couldn't quite categorize but approximated as morbid curiosity. "Ambassador Chen has decided that not dying today sounds pleasant," Chen corrected. "Also, this blanket is heated. Station environmental controls keep it cold in here." That single observation, delivered with casual honesty rather than diplomatic obfuscation, created a moment of profound silence. Every species present had independently noticed the temperature differential between their designated zones and the neutral space. Every species had independently chosen not to mention it, because acknowledging physical discomfort was tantamount to admitting weakness in diplomatic settings. Humans, apparently, just said these things out loud. The attaché gestured to the remaining corners. The blanket regulates temperature across multiple zones. It's designed for human camping expeditions where multiple people share thermal resources in variable environmental conditions. Basically, it keeps everyone comfortable, regardless of preferred temperature range. You are describing a technological solution to environmental regulation that this station already provides through sophisticated zonation, Quellen stated. I'm describing a blanket that doesn't make you sit in your assigned uncomfortable spot while pretending you're perfectly fine, the attaché countered. Also, it's soft. Jess's serrated limbs retracted slightly, not to neutral position, but to something less immediately threatening. The Thornback Collective does not make decisions based on textile properties. The Thornback Collective is standing in aggressive posture while all her dorsal plates are angled away from the heat vents, the attaché observed with the kind of casual precision that suggested she'd actually been paying attention to body language rather than just protocol. Which means you're cold, but you won't admit it because that would constitute acknowledging a vulnerability during negotiations. The silence that followed contained multitudes. Every diplomat present had spent decades, sometimes centuries, mastering the art of concealing physical responses to environmental stressors. The entire framework of interstellar negotiation depended on maintaining perfect composure, regardless of personal discomfort. This human had just called out that framework as performative nonsense, and offered an alternative in blanket form. Commander Jess made a decision that her tactical commanders would later describe as either brilliant or treasonous, depending on the outcome. She sat down on the indicated corner of the blanket. Her weight compressed the material, which adjusted its thermal output in response to her specific physiology. "This is tactically inadvisable," she announced to nobody in particular, while her carapace plates visibly relaxed in the regulated warmth. "Note it in your official report," the attaché suggested. "Right after the part where you almost started a war over a mining station nobody was using." Trevak's crystalline structure rotated slowly, processing variables that his logical frameworks weren't designed to accommodate. The Vrex do not require primitive comfort measures. The Vrex refract light more efficiently in stable thermal environments, Chen observed, because apparently she'd done her homework on crystalline species physiology. The blanket maintains consistent temperature distribution. Your current position fluctuates 0.7 degrees every 3 minutes based on station rotation patterns. The fact that Ambassador Chen had calculated this suggested she'd been monitoring environmental conditions throughout the entire negotiation. The fact that she mentioned it now suggested she'd been waiting for exactly this opportunity to deploy the information. Trevak settled onto the blanket's center position with a crystalline chime that his species produced when confronted with logical arguments they couldn't immediately refute. The blanket's surface shimmered slightly under his mass, distributing his weight through some human engineering principle that nobody present understood, but everyone could observe functioning effectively. "This remains highly irregular," he stated, his light patterns noticeably less aggressive and more contemplative. "Irregular was about to be medical evacuations and treaty violations," the attaché replied. "This is just irregular blanket usage." Quellen's containment sphere bobbed in its suspension field, the aquatic ambassador clearly wrestling with concepts that water-based philosophy hadn't prepared him for. "You propose that physical comfort affects diplomatic cognition. I propose that being cold and uncomfortable makes everyone cranky," the attaché said. "Which seems like a weird thing to build an entire diplomatic system around, but what do I know? I just organized supply requisitions." The admission of junior rank combined with completely bypassing senior authority would have been grounds for immediate dismissal in any other species delegation. Humans, inexplicably, seem to view competence and hierarchy as occasionally separate considerations. Chen patted the remaining corner of the blanket. "Ambassador Quellen, your sphere can interface with the thermal regulation without compromising containment integrity. The blanket's designed to work with variable environmental requirements. This is human pack bonding behavior," Quellen observed, but his sphere was already drifting toward the indicated position. "We have studied your species' peculiar tendency to form social attachments with incompatible organisms. You apply this instinct to diplomatic situations. We apply this instinct to most situations, Chen agreed. Turns out sharing resources and physical space builds cooperation more effectively than everyone sitting in designated zones, radiating mutual hostility. That cannot be accurate, Trivak interjected. Centuries of diplomatic theory establish clear boundaries as fundamental to peaceful negotiation. Centuries of diplomatic theory have you all fighting over territory nobody's using while sitting uncomfortably in a station specifically designed to make sure nobody gets along too well, the attaché pointed out. Maybe the theory needs updating. Quellin's sphere settled onto the final corner, and the blanket's thermal sensors registered 4 distinct species with 4 completely different environmental requirements, all now positioned in closer proximity than any diplomatic protocol would have previously allowed. The blanket, designed by human engineers who'd apparently anticipated exactly this scenario or something equally absurd, adjusted its output across multiple zones simultaneously. Every ambassador present experienced the same realization at approximately the same moment. They were comfortable. Not just physically comfortable, which was unusual enough in diplomatic settings, but comfortable in the broader sense of not being in immediate competition with everyone else in the immediate vicinity. It was deeply disturbing to several thousand years of established behavior patterns. This changes nothing regarding territorial negotiations, Jess stated, though her aggressive posturing had been replaced by something closer to relaxed alertness. This changes nothing regarding human presumption in established systems, Trivak added, his light patterns cycling through contemplative frequencies rather than aggressive ones. This changes nothing regarding the fundamental philosophical questions of occupation and usage rights, Quellin contributed, rippling his sphere in what might have been the aquatic equivalent of settling in. Sure, Chen agreed. We're all still mad at each other, but at least now we're warm and mad, which is objectively better than cold and mad. The attaché, her emergency intervention complete, began backing toward the chamber exit. I'm going to go update the supply requisition forms. You all just stay there and work out your differences like civilized species sharing a blanket. She left before anyone could formulate an official response, which was probably wise given that official responses to her actions would require invoking protocols that didn't technically exist yet. The 4 ambassadors sat on the blanket in silence, each processing the implications of their current situation through their respective cultural frameworks. Somewhere in the station's central processing cores, the holographic mediator updated its diplomatic protocol subroutines with a new category: human comfort intervention, effectiveness, unclear, precedent, none, recommendation, monitor, and document. The monitoring lasted approximately 45 seconds before Commander Jess broke the silence with a question that would echo through diplomatic channels for decades. Does anyone else find this blanket unreasonably pleasant? 3 species who'd been prepared to fight over abstract territorial principles suddenly discovered they had something more immediate in common, and the galaxy's understanding of negotiation tactics shifted on its axis by exactly 1 blanket width. The thing about dignity is that it requires constant maintenance, like a particularly demanding houseplant that dies if you look at it wrong. Galactic diplomacy had cultivated dignity for millennia, watering it with protocol and pruning it with carefully maintained hostility. Then someone introduced a blanket, and dignity started wilting immediately. The thermal distribution is mathematically optimal, Trivak observed, his crystalline structure refracting light in patterns that suggested deep contemplation rather than diplomatic posturing. Human engineering operates on principles that prioritize function over theoretical elegance, meaning it works even though it shouldn't, Chen translated. Precisely. Commander Jess shifted her position slightly, and the blanket adjusted in response. Her serrated limbs, previously held in aggressive configuration, had relaxed to something approaching casual alertness. The Thornback Collective maintains that territorial disputes remain unresolved. Obviously, Chen agreed. However, Jess continued, her mandibles clicking in a rhythm that suggested internal conflict. The human proposal regarding shared mining operations contains strategic merit previously unconsidered. Quellen's sphere rippled with what his species considered philosophical revelation. The concept of cooperative resource extraction contradicts established competitive frameworks, yet demonstrates practical advantages when examined without presupposed territorial assumptions. "You mean sharing works better than fighting," Chen said. "We mean the sophisticated implementation of collaborative paradigms generates superior outcomes compared to adversarial resource competition," Quellen corrected, because aquatic philosophers never used simple words when complicated ones were available. "That's what I said." The holographic mediator had stopped trying to apply traditional diplomatic protocols approximately 20 minutes earlier. Its processing cores were now dedicated to documenting what was either a breakthrough in interstellar relations or a complete breakdown of everything diplomatic theory considered foundational. Possibly both simultaneously. The mining station could be operated as joint venture, Trevak suggested, his light patterns forming geometric configurations that indicated serious proposal rather than dismissive negotiation. Each species contributes specialized capabilities. Resource distribution follows proportional investment models. We would require guaranteed access to rare mineral deposits, Jess stated. "We would need water extraction rights for our atmospheric processors," Quellen added. "We want the crystalline formations in Sector 7 for research purposes," Trevak said. "And humans get the salvage rights plus 20% administrative oversight for managing the whole operation," Chen finished. 4 species looked at each other across blanket space that had somehow transformed from neutral diplomatic zone into collaborative planning area. "This is acceptable," they said in near unison. Then experienced the collective discomfort of accidentally agreeing on something. The silence that followed contained the sound of several thousand years of diplomatic tradition quietly having an existential crisis. "We are still maintaining our positions on all other territorial disputes," Jess clarified quickly. "Absolutely," Trevak agreed. "This represents singular exception to established protocols. A unique circumstance driven by practical necessity rather than philosophical shift," Quellen contributed. "Sure," Chen said, suppressing what humans called a smile and what everyone else present recognized as the expression of someone who just won an argument without appearing to try. "Just this one time, because of the blanket. Because of practical considerations," Trevak corrected. "Right. The blanket had nothing to do with it." Nobody believed that, including the holographic mediator, which had begun drafting reports that would make diplomatic historians question everything they thought they understood about negotiation. The official report filed with the collective assembly described the resolution as a breakthrough in collaborative diplomatic methodology, achieved through innovative application of neutral space optimization protocols. This was technically accurate in the way that describing a hurricane as unsettled weather patterns was technically accurate. The unofficial reports, which circulated through back channels and were never formally acknowledged, mentioned the blanket. Station Kepler 7 became an unintentional case study in human integration methods. Other delegations began requesting similar, comfort-based negotiation frameworks, which human suppliers were delighted to provide in the form of blankets, cushions, and something called snack baskets that apparently made territorial disputes significantly easier to resolve. The Vrex published a scientific paper analyzing the thermal regulatory properties of human textile engineering. The Thornback Collective quietly incorporated shared space protocols into their military academy training. The Kalnari wrote 17 volumes of philosophy about the metaphysical implications of collaborative comfort, which everyone agreed was excessive but nobody was surprised about. Humans, for their part, acted like this was completely normal behavior and not a fundamental restructuring of galactic diplomatic theory. The joint mining operation in the outer reaches became the most productive resource extraction facility in 3 sectors. 4 species who'd been prepared to fight over it instead found themselves cooperating with alarming efficiency. The administrative reports never mentioned that the station's break room contained several blankets and that shift changes often involved multiple species sharing thermal space while complaining about equipment malfunctions. Ambassador Chen received 17 official commendations and one unofficial note from the junior attaché that simply read, "Told you the blanket would work." The collective assembly continued its tradition of organized hostility, diplomatic posturing, and elaborate protocols designed to prevent actual cooperation. But now, occasionally, someone would suggest taking a break and maybe sitting down somewhere comfortable to discuss things. These suggestions were always rejected as inappropriate deviation from established procedure. Then someone would produce a blanket, and suddenly the inappropriate deviation would be implemented as singular exception to normal protocols. The galaxy remained exactly as complicated, territorial, and prone to conflict as it had always been. Species still disagreed on fundamental principles, competed for resources, and maintained centuries-old grudges with impressive dedication. But now they did it while sitting on blankets, which turned out to make significantly more difference than several thousand years of diplomatic theory had predicted. Somewhere in human cultural archives, there existed an ancient proverb about predators and comfort, and the unexpected ways that sharing space transformed competition into cooperation. The galaxy was slowly, grudgingly learning what humanity had apparently known all along. Sometimes the solution to complex problems wasn't sophisticated protocol. Sometimes it was just a blanket and the admission that everyone was cold.